an exclusive XM presentation.
Bob Newhart is about to get unmasked.
Unmasked. Truth in comedy.
Swimming through the inner soul of the comedic mind.
Unmasked. On XM Satellite Radio.
Uncensored conversation with America's most important comedic minds.
Unmasked.
Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain.
I whimper on a flight, you know, and like when we go through an air pocket, I go, ah! And yell out things like, oh my God, this is it. You know? And this is before we take off. This is just...
Psychology just isn't one of your glamour jobs like astronaut, orthodontist.
Jerry, a giant step for mankind is more important than please rinse and spit.
This is Unmasked with Bob Newhart, an XM exclusive comedy presentation. Now, from Comics Comedy Club in New York City, here's Ron Bennington.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome to Unmasked. Welcome to Unmasked. Very, very exciting to be here tonight. Our guest tonight has had a couple of classic television shows. He's had #1 comedy albums. Won the Mark Twain Award for humor, which they give out in the Lincoln Center. This is a legend of comedy, and we're excited to have him here. Folks, a brand new book is called I Shouldn't Even Be Doing This. And I cannot believe that I'm introducing Mr. Bob Newhart. Bob Newhart. There he is. Bob, the new book, I Shouldn't Even Be Doing This. It's kind of your career. It's kind of your routines that you've liked, stories that you've done. But my favorite thing, I think, is to see that a slacker could really make something of himself, because it took you a long time to get going.
It did, yeah. I was an accountant, and then I worked for I wrote copy for a while, and realized that I wasn't going to be happy with the rest of my life unless I found out whether I could make a living doing comedy. And there were the lean years where nothing was happening. And I had a degree in accounting, and all my buddies were going to law school and then getting married, and I was working at the unemployment office. So I'm thinking, boy, you really screwed up your life. But there was one thing. There's always something on the horizon, and then I made the record album, the Button Down Mind, and then it exploded. It
is interesting here because now there's comedy clubs every 600 yards in the country. So anybody who gets 2, 3, 4 minutes can hop up and start. Your first time on stage, you recorded and performed the entire album.
Yeah, well, I was there. It was at the Tidelands in Houston, Texas, in February of 1960, and I had been there for 2 weeks, kind of honing the material, and then at the end of the 2 weeks, we recorded the album. And the first night we recorded Friday night, and then 2 shows on Saturday. And on Friday night, I had a drunken woman, in the front row, which. As a stand-up, you find out the worst thing you can get is the drunken woman. A drunken woman heckler, because the sympathy very soon passes to her, So it does. And so you can do 1 or 2 shots, and then you got to get off it, because hey, what. And so she was sitting in the very front row, and she kept saying, that's a bunch of crap. That's a bunch of crap. During my whole act. And so we went up to listen to what we recorded, and she was clearer than I was. So we had to throw that show out. So we had 2 shows on Saturday to put the album together.
You had written this at your house, but had never really performed in front of an audience. So were you confused whether this is going to go over? I mean, you had to be somewhat fearful.
I was terrified. It was the first nightclub I ever played. What happened was I had some friends in Chicago. I was on a local television show, but it wasn't successful at all. And I had a DJ friend, Dan Sorkin. The Warner Brother record people were coming through Chicago, where I was living, and they called on Dan because he was a big disc jockey, and he said, I have this friend of mine that I really think is funny, and they said, well, have him put some of the stuff down on tape, and we'll listen to it. So Dan called me, so at that time I had the driving instructor, submarine commander, and Abe Lincoln. Those were the three routines I had. And so I recorded them, played them for the Warner Brother people. They said, okay, great, we like the material. So we recorded at your next nightclub. And I said, well, see, we kind of have a problem there because I've never played a nightclub. They said, oh, well, we'll have to get you into a nightclub. So they got me into the Tidelands in Houston. And I walked out terrified. I mean, absolutely terrified. But the first thing, Ron, as you know, the first thing you learn is you can never show fear on stage. That's the first thing. If you show fear, you're dead meat. So I went out with all the bravado I could muster and pretended like I knew what I was doing. You know, and as a matter of fact, I was the opening act for Ken and Mitzi Welsh, who wound up writing a lot of special material for Carol Burnett. And I did my 3 routines because I didn't have a full album yet. So, and I came off and I walked by the maitre d' and he said, go back out there applauding. And I said, well, that's all I got. And he said, well, go back out. So I went back out. You know, ignorance is bliss. And I said, which one would you like to hear again?
And, you know, it's interesting that you brought up working through your fear, which I don't think most people that watch performers know that everybody deals with some sense or another.
I noticed you were pacing back.
I like to pace before every show.
I do the same thing. A comedian, it's kind of like being a hooker, you know. I mean, it's the first time you do it for money, then you're a pro. You know? And so I did it. You know, I got paid for doing a comedy in 1957. So it's been like 50 years. And to this day, I still do probably 20 stand-up dates a year. And about 5 o'clock, I start pacing, wonder what they're going to be like. Is this going to work? Maybe I'll throw that in because that would be good for this area. And you know, if I walked out on a stage and if I wasn't nervous, I'd be nervous because it's like a friend. He's always there, Mr. Fear. He's always there, you know. Yeah,
and you just try to turn that into energy in some way. Yeah. But you know what's always funny is any gig that you get in the future, sure, I'll do it. And then the closer and closer you get to it, like, what the hell am I doing? Talking with Bob Newhart? No, I thought that was a fin. Because I'm thinking back there, you know, no one's going to leave there saying Bob was terrible. We've been doing this for 50 years. What went wrong tonight? Oh, the other guy.
I played a club in Windsor, Ontario, Canada, and the record hadn't come out yet. I went out, I died every night, 2 shows a night, 7 days a week, and not a snicker. I mean, they're Canadian, so they were very respectful. They never looked up, you know. So I played to the top of heads, you know. And so I ran into Harpo Marx in Palm Springs. He introduced himself to my wife and I, my wife Jane, and invited us to their house. So he's showing me some scrapbooks. And he shows me this one playbill they have, the Marx Brothers, and there were a couple other big names on it. And I said, Harpo, of all the places you guys played, you know, in vaudeville, why did you save this one? And he said, because we never got a laugh for an entire week. Mm-hmm. So, and you know it's true. When one stand-up comedian talks to another, they talk about the time they died.
Right.
They never talk about the successes. You know, I kill that audience. You know, no, it was the other night. Wow.
Well, successes, you never believe them. When they say I died, you know they're telling the truth. Yeah. It's like a guy who told you how many fights he won in high school. Sure you did. But one story about getting his ass kicked, and you're like, yeah, it's a great story.
You remind me of a story. Two stand-up comedians are having dinner at the Stage Delicatessen. And the one guy says, he said, you know my act. You know, it's a nice act. It's not a great act, but hey, it puts food on the table for my wife and my kids. He said, I'm opening for Tony Bennett. All of a sudden, it goes over. I mean, the audience, I killed him. And I go off. Tony comes out. They're still applauding for me. So Tony says, come on out. I come back out. Last Thursday, I'm opening for Steve and Edie. Same thing. I go up, bang, gangbusters. I walk off, they're still applauding. Steve says, would you like Dickie to come back out again? I come out. Last Monday, I died. And the other comic said, yeah, I heard about that.
Yeah, comics will always tell you, oh, it's such a sad story. I don't know whether you heard this. And they'll tell you how their friend died. And it's like, okay, thanks, sir. Really being there for me. So you're like 29, 30 years old. You still haven't found your place yet. The family start to think you're not going to make it. They
didn't know what I was doing. They had no idea. I had these part-time jobs. I was, behind the counter at Goldblatt's and department store in Chicago and the unemployment office. And but I had to find out. I just couldn't. I couldn't spend the rest. I think it came from Ted Mack Amateur Hour. I saw this kid out there, and he was dancing or singing, whatever, and you could tell he was uncomfortable, and he didn't want to be there, and you could almost see the parent, in the wings, pushing him out. And I just decided I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life, like, living through my kids. I was going to find out. And if I fell on my face, then at least I could spend the rest of my life saying, hey, I tried that, and it didn't work,
So you get to this point, you put out the album. I guess you weren't expecting much from it.
No.
And it becomes the number one album in the country at the time. Not the number one comedy album. I think it was the first comedy album ever to go to number one.
Yeah, I think so.
The follow-up album goes to number 2, while the first album is number 1. He's now got the number 1 album and the number 2 album in the country. This never happened again until Guns N' Roses with Use Your Illusions 1 and 2. Axl Rose was finally.
And I said, you hate. First of all, I didn't know I had the record. I didn't know that that was any accomplishment until I lost it. And then, but I said, well, it's terrible to have a record and not know you have it and then lose it. And the only way you found out you had it was by somebody telling you just lost it. I sound like Jackie Mason, don't I? So I lost the first album, but the second album couldn't eat the second album, the first album still. So, but anyway, the saving grace was it went to a friend. It went to Alex. We talked maybe 2-3 times. Is that Axe now? Thought I heard a cell phone go off.
Even when the first time I saw Welcome to the Jungle, I said, I think Axl's doing Bob Newhart. I think there's a similarity there. So that has to be a shocking thing to go from this guy who's not even making a living at what he's doing. You got to work part-time jobs. To now you're the biggest act in the country overnight.
Yeah, it was like New Year's every night. I just kept I get a phone call. My manager called me up and he said, "How many Sullivans do you want to do?" And I said, 6, I guess. Okay. I don't know. And I went in to do the first show I did was the Parr show. I was supposed to do Gary Moore's show, and Jack called up Joe Hamilton, a good friend who produced the show. And he said, "Could we have Newhart on before you have him on Gary's show? Because we're not in prime time." So Joe said, "Okay." So I go on the Parr show. My first time in New York, first appearance on a television show, and they tell me, they say, "Okay, go out and you see a mark on the floor, hit the mark, and do the routine, and then at the end of the routine, look over at Jack, and Jack will either motion you to come over or he'll applaud." Which meant which meant you died. So I go out and do whatever routine I did. I look over at Jack, and it seemed like a century, But it was only a couple seconds, and then Jack said, "Come on."
What's to stop you from walking over anyway? Thanks, Jack. Woo!
I didn't think that quickly. That's why.
So now everything is taken up for, and in the book, I shouldn't even be doing this. You mention a private party at a lawyer's that you got and some of the people that were there.
Yeah, I was appearing at the Crescendo in Los Angeles, and I was headlining for the first 3 weeks, and then the second 3 weeks, I was opening for Errol Garner, and I was getting $1,500 a week. That's what I was getting. So I get a call, could I come out a day earlier? They had this private party for this entertainment lawyer named Greg Boutzer in Los Angeles for $1,500, which is what I was getting for the whole week at the Crescendo. So yeah, of course. So I go out, and it's in his living room. I was sitting like this, and I guess I was doing the driving instructor. And I look over, and there's George Burns. I go, oh my God. And I look there's Jack Benny. Oh. There's Danny Kaye standing up. And I go, I'm timing this all wrong, and Jack knows it, and So it was. You just were kind of just swept along with the with the tide. You just the phone rang and you said sure. Yeah.
But at any time did you think this is happening too fast? How do I slow this down? Or did you not even expect it to last?
No, I didn't expect it to last. I thought I figured I might have 4 or 5 years, and then but I'd always had that memory of Jack Benny and George Burns, and so but it lasted.
Yes, it has. Yes, it has lasted. The early albums, so phenomenal still hold up. They still seem like they could have been written today. And the thing that's great about them is that they're so subversive that you really are taking on, major corporations and advertising and lawyers. And a lot of the stuff that Lenny Bruce was, yelling, "This is bullshit," you actually showed how it was bullshit. And it's phenomenal.
You picked up, stuff. You picked up on that.
Yeah.
And Steve Martin also, he said the same thing. It's very well. First of all, comedy is subversive anyway. It's anti-authority. At that time, it was Shelley Berman, myself, Michael Elaine, Johnny Winters, and Lenny Bruce, and they lumped us all together and called us the sick comics, because we were doing material people hadn't done before. Like I was doing Abe Lincoln, which was a thing on a rather dim-witted, revered ex-president.
Right.
And Mike and Lane were doing a thing on a funeral, picking out a casket. And Lenny, of course, Lenny was just out there, and Johnny's just out there,
Sure.
And Shelley. And the retirement party was, I lived that. It was, the guy, after 50 years, he gets this gold watch from the company, and they introduce him to get up and make a speech. And in the beginning, one of the host says, one of the executives says, I always call his name Charlie Bedlow. I always call him Smiling, Easygoing Charlie. And then he brings Charlie out, and Charlie is swackered. He's bombed, out of his mind. And he says, they give you this watch, and it works out. It works out to it's a Timex, and it works out to about 28 cents a year. He says, I know they called me Smiling and Easygoing, and you'd be smiling and easygoing if you were bombed all the time too. But he said it's the only way I can make it down to this crummy job, So I got a letter, and the guy wrote me and said, how can you make fun of Charlie Bedlow, the poor guy, and I said, no, I'm making fun of the corporation that made Charlie Bedlow the way he is. I'm not,
It's just the society was kind of just held up in those. And I think that the great thing that worked out for you is that since it took you so long to make it and you worked all these different jobs, you kind of brought life experiences where a lot of people who, I broke into, show business at 15, 16, that's all they know. But you know that kind of real pain of
the funny thing that happens is you become successful, and then you kind of get cut off from the source of the material,
right.
So what I try to do, I try to become invisible, when I'm on the road, and try to listen on conversations about what real people are talking about, and you have to work at it. Like there was a thing on the other day. I don't know if you saw the thing with Pluto at Disneyland where he's chasing the kid at Disneyland. Yeah. And imagine the head of the theme parks calling Pluto, and saying, Pluto? Yeah, you kind of lost it, didn't you, Pluto? Yeah, I know. Well, I know it's hot in the damn suit, but I mean, don't tell me I was grumpy for 12 years.
Well, with Bob Newhart, and of course the book is I Shouldn't Even Be Doing This. You brought up
That's from a joke, by the way. Do you know the joke? I went through a lot of different titles, and you dropped your flask. So. Anyway, I was saying about what the hell?
The joke. This is where the title came from.
I was kind of.
I'm with you, Bob. I'm not going to let you go here. I'm going to stay with you the whole time.
Well, you will have seen it. Yeah, he went right into it. That's the last time he made any sense. Comedians like Dick Martin and Ron Martin, we all know the joke, so we just do the punchline to each other. I'll get the half that eats. I'll burn a hole in the coat. These are all. So this is from a guy, an employee, and the boss's wife are having this torrid love affair, and they're in the throes of passion, and she yells out, "Kiss me, kiss me." And he says, I shouldn't even be doing this. So, it just seemed an appropriate for a comedian. Then there's one which really kind of explained. It's the fat lady in the pink dress wants a white wine. I was going to call it that for a while, the book. And it came from, we'd have parties at the house, and the kids they'd love to pretend to be waiters, So my son Tim comes to me and he says, Dad, the fat lady in the pink dress wants a white wine. And I go, oh. I said, you mean Mrs. Peterson? He said, no, the real fat lady in the pink dress. So the point of it was that comedians, there's a part of us that still remains a child, and we still say the fat lady in the pink dress wants a white wine, because that's.
You kind of bring that up, and one of my favorite experiences was the Tonight Show, was the fact that Johnny liked you so much that when I was a kid, those were always my favorite nights whenever I could see that Johnny was happy. And you were one of those comics that he just adored. What was that relationship like? Because people still, he's still a mystery to people, Johnny Carson, after all this time.
We were good friends, and we go out when he was in New York, and then he'd come out to the West Coast and do a couple of weeks out there, and then we'd go out afterwards, and he'd come to my house, and we'd have drinks, and a bunch of people there, and Doc. But Johnny would do, because he trusted me, he would do the damnedest things to me, because you have a pre-interview on the show, and they say, like, what do you want to talk about with Johnny? And I'd say, the Rickles and I we just came back from a trip, and I got a funny story about Don on board ship. And they said, okay, so the top of the notes is Bob has a funny story about Rickles on the cruise. You know? So I'd sit down, and he'd get that weird look in his eye, you know, and I go, oh. And this usually happened when the monologue died. Then he was going to take everybody with him. You go down with the ship, you know, with Johnny. So anyway, the monologue died, so I kind of knew I was in trouble. So I sit down. He says, "Do you ever go skeet shooting?" I have nothing on skeet shooting. But he would never leave you out there. He'd always make you look good. That was Johnny's secret. That he made the guests look good.
Right.
Know?
But I guess with certain, like you, and he used to do it with Rickles as well, that the regular show business thing would be kind of thrown to the side, and it would almost be like you guys were sitting around a diner or something late at night just busting each other up. It was always great stuff.
Yeah.
And he shared that you both, I guess, love Jack Benny quite a bit, so he shared that as well.
I have a favorite Jack Benny story in the book. Jack was the bravest comedian I have ever seen work. He wasn't afraid of silence.
Yeah,
He was going to take as long as it took to tell the story.
And that's when you know you got him, too, when you're that strong, when you're like, yes, leave this quiet for a while, and then bam.
I used to do, they're like signposts where you kind of judge the audience by the reaction. I used to do a thing on victimless crimes. You know, I said, the police are spread so thin. I mean, and there are certain victimless crimes, you know. I said, gambling. I mean, I don't think gambling's a crime. Yeah, if you're addicted, it's a crime. I mean, somebody could make an argument prostitution isn't really a crime, you know. I said, all the guys in the audience, we've all done this. We're home alone. The wife's out. The kids are gone. You slip into one of the wife's dresses. I mean, you're not hurting anybody. We've all done it, you know. Oh, you don't do that. And that always tipped me off as to how soon the reaction came. It was immediate here, by the way. That's kind of, you knew what kind of audience you had.
There's a Brooklyn audience, so cross-dressing and big guys, it's okay. You know, we were talking about the time that you came into the business, too, doing stand-up. That was really the golden age, I think, of comedy albums. There was so many great ones out there.
Yeah.
In a way, it's got a more mysterious feel about it than watching an HBO special where you see there's something really great about those old albums.
It's as you said, the HBO stand-up. It's the same thing, only put in a different medium, because when we made the comedy albums, first of all, the audience, the young kids, the college kids, they couldn't afford a nightclub. They had covered charges, you know, service charge and all this. And so, and besides, the comedians were saying, you know, take my wife, please. I'll burn a hole in the coat. You know, I'll get the half the deeds. They were doing,
right.
You know, anybody could do the joke. And they were doing mother-in-law jokes, and these are college kids. They had nothing to do. What mother-in-law? You know, what are you talking? My wife is such a bad cook. You can't. You know, and what wife? What are they talking about? So what they do is they get our albums and they buy some pizza and some beer and sit around in the dorm, and they play the album. And it was like their nightclub. You know, right. And the same thing happens today. I think on HBO, they get a video and they play it of a guy they saw. And
I guess it's like almost every comedian is a part of whatever time that happens to be. That some of this stuff holds up, some of this stuff doesn't. And if a young guy came up doing the long routines that you used to do, I don't know whether the audience would give it on that kind of attention now.
Yeah, it kind of changed. I noticed that I played Vegas a lot, and I noticed that the attention span kind of, and I think it was Laugh-In, you know, because they were bang, 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 bang,
right.
bang, which was really Olsen and Johnson, and you know, and so the attention span of the public kind of shortened, you know, and then you had MTV with the fast cuts, and so if the driving instructor went 8 minutes, I cut it down to 4.5 or 5 because I realized, you know, that you could kind of see the people just
right.
dozing off, you know.
Yeah. So. Why weren't those characters kind of spun off into movies or TV shows? When they started offering you TV shows, you would have thought they would have based them on some of those characters.
Well, I did a TV show in '61, a variety show.
Yeah.
And And we did a lot of monologues, and the show got an Emmy. I got an Emmy for writing on the show, and a Peabody and a pink slip from NBC. all in the same year. But yeah, we did, and I just couldn't match the output of
right.
Maintain the quality of the monologue and do it every week. It was impossible.
But I mean, even the characters, once they were established, because you were doing what they do on The Office now. So any one of those characters could have been spun off. And they're still there, Bob. It's time to make a little money.
Well, I'm glad it holds up. I really am. That's the greatest compliment.
Are you still turned on when you see comedy, young comedians, people you got your eye on? Or?
Yeah, I watch the young guys to see what they're talking about, to see because that's what you do. You adapt yourself to changing times. If you don't, you're just kind of left in the dust. I'm not stealing their material, but I'm finding out areas that they're talking about, and then in my own way saying, okay, I could do it this way, yeah.
And I noticed that young comedians are crazy about you. And you never know which ones they decide, because there's certain performers that are great performers that couldn't hold everybody's attention now. But comics have come here to see you tonight. And a lot of the stuff that's in this book really could be lessons for a lot of people coming up in it. Because it seemed like you never let it get to your head too much, whether you were successful or going through rough times.
Well, I had a wife who never let it get to my head. She was always the leveler. I tell the story about in L.A. on Tuesday, we have to take out the recycled and unrecycled garbage and put it out in front of the house. And so, like late in the afternoon, my wife Jenny will say, they're coming for the garbage tomorrow. We just take the unrecycled out and put it out, outside. And I would say to her, do you think Joanne Woodward would ask Paul Newman to put out the unrecycled? And she said, if you were Paul Newman, I wouldn't ask you to So she keeps me pretty level-headed.
We're going to let the audience come over and ask a couple questions, too. And I know they'll want to get to a lot of your TV shows. But there was always a piece that I remember from Newhart that I thought was always so funny. And that was something where I thought you kind of went out of character. It might be very small to you. But since most of your stuff was just you working with words, there was one sketch where you had a sandwich and wanted to watch a ball game, and your wife was having a party that night. And you almost pantomimed a piece for like about 4 or 5 minutes with this. And I thought, there was you doing physical comedy in a way I never saw you do it before.
Yeah, it was. That was a great thing about a live audience, which we always did the show in front of a live audience, was they would tell you, when you were doing something, they'd let you know it's working. So then you say, oh, okay, I'll make this a little longer.
Milk it a little more. So a piece like that you hadn't really planned on lasting that long. Just it was working.
That particular piece, I don't remember. Actually, I don't remember that particular piece, but I know what you're saying.
The reason why I remember it because I'm like, he could have worked as a physical comedian, even though most of your stand-up, I would just watch you work from standing still.
And it also involved food, which maybe is another reason.
Yeah, that always helps. All right, we'll take some questions over here for Bob Newhart.
Suzanne always said that. She would get mad at me, and she said, he's such a good physical comedian. Why don't you do that more? And I just never felt comfortable in it.
Well, it worked. So, I mean, I always think it's interesting that when someone knows one aspect of comedy, it's like you paid attention to enough of it. I mean, you brought up Harpo and all, and I'm sure you watched a lot of the silent folks and knew what they were doing and how they got their laughs.
Yeah, I was in, people say, who are you influenced by? And, of course, people say Jack Benny because of the timing, but you can't teach timing, I don't think. I learned from every good comedian I ever saw work on the Ed Sullivan Show and would kind of analyze it. Why did that work? Or why did we wonder why he chose that word rather than that word, and so I'm indebted to all those great comedians that I saw, Gleason and all those incredible comedians.
There's a little something you can take from everybody, I guess.
Yeah, and as you know, I'm sure you did it too. When you first start out, you're hiding behind something.
Right, right.
And then every so often you just kind of peek out and do a little bit of your own thing just to see if, oh, okay, that works, okay. And then you hide behind the person and then finally you get out from behind the person and you start doing what you do.
All right, the new book is I Shouldn't Even Be Doing This. It's Bob Newhart. You have a question for him, sir?
Yeah, I do. Bob, you have, I guess, what's probably considered another record, at least by most TV critics, which is probably they would call the ending to the Newhart show the best series ending in TV history. Most people would say. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, because it was great.
I bowed my head and took credit for it. It was actually my wife's idea. It was the sixth season of Newhart, and I was kind of unhappy with CBS because we had established 9 o'clock Monday night as a hit time slot, and it hadn't been before. It hadn't been since MASH was there. But then in the sixth year, they started moving us to 8:30, and they put Murphy Brown in at 9, and then they moved it to 9:30, and it was kind of like, try to find Bob this week, And so we're at Christmas time. We're at a party, and I said, I think this is going to be the last year of Newhart, because I'm really unhappy with CBS. And she said, well, if you do end it this year, you should end it with a dream sequence where you wake up in bed with Susie and you explain this dream you had about owning this inn in Vermont and all these crazy, inexplicable things that the maid was an heiress and the janitor didn't understand what you were talking about. And then there were these 3 woodsmen, but only only one of them talked, and they had accents. They were right out of Deliverance, I think. I mean, there was a lot of intermarriage that among cousins that went into Larry, Daryl, and Daryl. So, but it was her idea. Yeah.
And I guess not a day of your life you not hear about that episode too. People bring it up to you all the time because it's one of those I mean, when you think of how much television we've watched in this country, and that one gets brought up on any list about the greatest moments.
It's kind of unfair because other shows are judged by that ending, but we had another show to refer to. I mean that was the advantage. Sure. We had another show, and it was kind of a Monty Python kind of moment of wink, wink, nudge, nudge. You remember this, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And you're right about that too. It was like when Seinfeld ended his show, all the pressure in the world was on them to have a big ending, and it almost was like they tried too hard with it. Then everyone went, well, that wasn't Newhart's ending. It was not really fair to measure every ball player against Michael Jordan. It's kind of cheating. Yes, sir.
Hi, Bob.
Hi.
I want to ask you about
everybody
that.
drink.
That was my favorite game in college. All the friends used to get by and play that. Anytime you said, hi, Bob, someone said, hi, Bob, on the show, we would drink. Have you ever played that game, and when did you become aware of it?
I never played it. No, I heard of it. I heard it started at Southern Method at the university, and which I hope is true. But no, I heard about it, and I mean, I'm glad people enjoyed the show and want to watch it, but I don't want to go down in history as accounting for the most number of hangovers ever among college students. But people had to like the show to watch it that much. Yeah.
Bob Newhart sitting in with us on Unmasked. Make sure you pick up the new book. It's I Shouldn't Even Be Doing This. It's a biography about your life and times. Did you feel like now was a time that you wanted to write this? I'm sure you've had opportunities over the years to write this.
I have been approached, yeah, and I kept putting it off, and then I was approached by Hyperion, and I would make little notes about things that had happened, like the unemployment office and being an accountant, and just for my own benefit. And Hyperion approached me, and I said, knowing me, I said, you're going to have to lock yourself in, and you're going to have a deadline, and you're going to have to meet it. Otherwise, you'll never do it. So I said, okay. And then I knew I had to sit down and put this down on paper, and worked with a writer named Josh Young, and he kind of gave it the form, and I just kind of told him all the stories, and he put them in order. But I knew I had to have that deadline. That Josh is coming in town. You got to spend 3-4 hours with him. And
Right.
You better find something to talk about.
When you would write your routines, like King Kong or whatever, would that be by spoken word, or would you write it down?
The good ones, they came full blown. Like Abe Lincoln. Abe Lincoln just wrote itself. It was a question of how long I wanted to make it. Because boom, it was there.
That's always the strangest thing to me about creativity, and you'll hear it with songwriters, comedians, that the really best stuff is just there, almost finished.
And it makes you nervous because you're saying, is this something new, or did I hear this somewhere?
Yeah.
This is coming too easy.
Yeah.
It makes you very nervous. Yeah, but usually I would have the germ of an idea, like Pluto, the thing, and I'd do a little bit of it and see if it worked, and then I'd build in escape hatches, along the way.
Get out of it.
So if it wasn't working, I'd be out, And then it kept getting longer and longer and longer, and then before I knew it, I had a routine.
And I don't know if the audience realizes, is another thing that you explained there, is the way the comedian works when we talk about, okay, you hide fear. But at the same time, while they're laughing, there's a second voice almost behind you going, I can take this further. It's time to get out of it.
Yeah.
There's an amazing amount of thinking that goes on during your quiet moments on stage.
I did. I was playing a city, and I used this word, denigrate, and there was silence, and I thought, oh, they don't know what denigrate means. So as I'm doing the rest of my act, I'm like fast forwarding in my head to see if there are any other big words that I'm using. And I got to find other words to put in.
That's great. Yes.
The relationship between you and Susan Pleshette was just fantastic. There was nobody better. How was she chosen? What made you decide on her?
Actually, we were casting the part of the wife, and we hadn't found anybody. And my manager at that time, Martha Price, who had founded MTM along with Mary Tyler Moore and Grant Tinker, her husband, he was watching The Tonight Show, and Susie was on it. And I think Susie and I were both. Susie remembers that we were both on it at the same time. I think she was just on it. And he called me up the next day and he said, I found your wife, And of course I said, I didn't know she was missing. And the old comic going, nom, 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 nom. And he said, I think she would be the perfect wife. I think the chemistry between the two of you would be great, and she's her own woman, and I said, great. I said, do you think we can get her? Does she want to do television? Turns out she was doing movies, and she wanted to get off the road, and she wanted to have a family, and she said she'd love to do it. So, and when I did Newhart, I told Mary Fran, I said, Mary, you got one of the toughest jobs in the world because you're going to be compared to Suzanne Pleshette, and that chemistry is really very difficult to find. I mean, you find it in a bottle,
How did Mary Fran feel about that last episode of the Bob Newhart show where suddenly she's not in the bed, the other wife is?
She wasn't really happy about it, Well, first of all, St. Elsewhere ended in a dream sequence,
right?
And it kind of killed syndication for St. Elsewhere. It never did well in syndication because people were saying, we cared about these people and we invested our emotions, and now you're telling us it was just a dream, So we were somewhat concerned about that, and to keep the ending from getting out, because the tabloids would pick up on it and put, ending of Newhart, final show. We put in the script a scene. I get hit in the head with a golf ball and I go up to heaven, which is a fiction I love to encourage. and I meet with George Burns, who's God, and and he and I had this conversation. Well, we never intended to shoot it, and we didn't even contact George, and so the tabloids grabbed it, and they said final episode. So now it never existed in script form. The scene with Susie and I in bed. I told the cast that morning. Dick Martin knew, he was the director, and of course the writers knew because I gave them the idea and they fleshed it out and did a brilliant job of fleshing it out. And we never told the crew. And we did final rehearsal and they went off to dinner, and they came back and we said, "Oh, we've added a scene, so we haven't had time. We don't have time to block it, but." Camera A, you're here. Camera B, you're here. C, you shoot Bob, and you shoot Suzanne, and they have what they call floaters in television, which hides the next scene, so the people aren't distracted. They're concentrating on it. So we pulled the floater away, and there was the bedroom from the Bob Newhart show, and the people began to applaud. They began to applaud the set. They hadn't they hadn't seen Susie or I yet, but they knew, and yay, and they started screaming, and then Susie and we did the scene, and as you say, it's.
And you were able to keep that secret. Now today with the internet, I'm sure it would have gotten out there.
Well, yeah, it's amazing it didn't get out because. We filmed it 6 weeks before it aired, and we sent it to the local stations, and asked them not to reveal the ending. And I think all of them, kept it quiet.
It's amazing. Is that Jimmy?
Hi, Bob.
Jimmy Norton, famous comedian, here meeting Bob. You remember on the Tonight Show when Bob Hope would just suddenly come walking out and everybody would
You have a pretty legendary friendship with Don Rickles. I just wanted to ask about the dynamics of your friendship with Rickles, which has been talked about for years.
Someone came to me and they said, Don Rickles doesn't have a friend. Would you be... And so I said, well, show me a picture of him. And they said, and I said, yeah, he needs a friend. No, actually, my wife and Barbara Rickles, Barbara Sklar, knew each other before Don and I met. And we got married in 1963, and I think Don and Barbara got married in 1965. So this was like 1967. And I'm in Vegas. I'm in the main room, and he's in the lounge. There is a pecking order.
Yeah, sure.
And so Ginny calls up Barbara and said, can we let's have a late dinner, because Don has between his second and third show in the lounge. And so we go there, and Ginny's sitting with Don, and I'm talking to Barbara, and now we're getting up. We could go in and see Don's third show in the Sahara Lounge. And Ginny said, "Gee, he's just the sweetest man. He's so they just had Mindy, and he wants to be home. He hates being on the road, and he hates being away for 6-8 weeks at a time." And she said, "He's such a sweet man." I said, "Well, honey, his act may be a little different than that." So he came out, and the first thing he says is, he said, "The stammering idiot from Chicago is in the audience." With his hooker wife in Bayonne, New Jersey.
Now, he has a book out at the same time.
Yeah.
Right? He's got a book out.
Yeah.
You guys a little competitive about that with each other, or?
No. He has a thinner book out.
Ladies and gentlemen, when they write the book on American comedy, they're going to have to give 2 chapters to Mr. Bob Newhart. Mr. Bob Newhart here on Unmasked. Standing ovation for you, Bob. Bob Newhart.
Unmasked on XM. Truth in comedy.
Unmasked.
swimming through the inner soul of the comedic mind.
This XM exclusive comedy presentation was recorded at Comics Comedy Club in New York City.
Yeah.